Welcome to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Shade Curry, and I believe every divorced woman deserves a romantic relationship where she feels safe, loved, and cherished. You can create the most amazing life after divorce, and I will teach you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Shade Curry, and I am your host today. We're talking about creating your extraordinary life after divorce, or if you are thinking about divorce and you're in a difficult marriage, this podcast is for you. And if you're thinking about creating new relationships after divorce, this podcast is for you. So welcome to the Extraordinary Life and Dating After Divorce podcast. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today. And today we're talking about over-responsibility. And it's twin, under-responsibility. I don't know how much of under-responsibility we'll get into today. I'm going to try to combine them both in this one episode so that you get both sides of the coin. But if not, we'll do a part 2 and continue it later in the month. So I want to start with talking about my first marriage and the way I showed up. I think some of the things that are hard to really to articulate when you're in the relationship space, when you're a life coach, especially working with women who are in difficult marriages, women who have been with partners who have narcissistic tendencies, partners who are abusive or cruel, is to be able to show the woman ways that she contributed to the dynamic without victim blaming, because no matter how over responsible you are or how under responsible you are, no one deserves to be abused. No one deserves to be manipulated or abused just because they did too much. That's not okay. So I'm going to try to do this with a lot of nuance, giving a lot of my own personal examples, because we cannot create change until we change our own patterns. Now, you can't. All right, I'm going into all of the rabbit trails now. So let me just kind of give a little bit of my story, one of my examples to kind of illustrate this. So throughout my first marriage, my ex-husband showed up with a huge sense of entitlement, right? And now I grew up in a culture that sort of endorsed the story that men were entitled to behave in certain ways. And then layered on top of that cultural programming was religious programming. So I was an ardent Christian, born again, super spiritual, quote unquote, whatever that meant, highly religious. And that religion also endorses men being entitled to certain things. So when I think about myself at 21, when I got married, and my 20s into my 30s, I had no understanding that the behavior was sort of, there was like no moral code to a man being entitled to all those things. And there was no moral code that bound me to delivering what my ex-husband wanted. But I did somewhat. I wouldn't call myself the perfect submissive wife, but I did believe that, yeah, why I should submit. So I was like working as hard as I could to like do that. And so in that dynamic, not through any fault of mine per se, this was the culture that I was raised in. This is the conditioning that I had received and the training that I had received. So it wasn't like I was wrong for doing that. And in many ways, was he wrong for doing it? I don't know, because that was his conditioning and that was the culture that he was brought up in. So he wasn't quote unquote wrong. However, the negative impact of his behavior on me was way, way, way more than any negative impact of what I was doing by overfunctioning. And so with that, background laid, what I did throughout the marriage that quote unquote contributed, so I put contributed in quotes because, again, no woman deserves to be abused. No person deserves to be abused or to be treated with cruelty, was that I took it upon myself to make sure that he didn't fail, right? Like, it was important to me that he did not fail, that he succeeded in whatever it is he wanted to do, even if he was bound to fail. And so I'll give you some examples. One example was when he was struggling in his career. And I would always step in to, again, quote unquote, support what he was doing in his career, And that would spill over into over responsibility. An example was very early in the marriage, he struggled with authority at work. He struggled with collaborating in the workplace. And so he was always trying to move out into being on his own, or he would get let go, or he would just quit suddenly and not have a job and want to be an entrepreneur. And so in that, there was one situation. This was super early. I was pregnant with our first child. I was working full time. And he had been working full time, and then he, left the job. Suddenly I was like, I don't remember. But he wasn't working, and he was like, okay, he was going to he was going to run this business. He was going to run a tutoring business, right? And so he started it, and then he would be home all day, and he would work on it. But then he wouldn't go on any sales calls. So people would call and ask, hey, I want you to come and work on tutoring my kid, or hiring a teacher to tutor my kid, or whatever. And he had social anxiety. And so he would be too afraid to actually go on these calls. And so then I would get up in the morning and, mind you, I was pregnant. If I remember correctly, I was 6 months pregnant. And I got up and I would go to work. So there was no remote work at the time. Get up, go to work, spend my 9 hours at work, come home, and then in the evening, get in the car and go with him on these sales calls. That was insane. I look back now and I'm like, what is happening? So it looks like support. It looks like being helpful. It looks like being kind. It looks like trying to help someone succeed, but I was being over responsible. In that situation, this other person needed to face their own fears. He needed to face his fears. He needed to fail or succeed. He might have succeeded. Maybe if I hadn't stepped in, who knows? He needed to either fail or succeed so that he could pivot, so that he could grow, he could change, he could become more self-aware, he could handle his own adult responsibilities. Now, granted, he was not a kid, right? He wasn't a child. He was a full-grown adult. We were both married adults. I was pregnant with his kid, but I was functioning for him like I was his parent. And when I say it in this context, it sounds crazy, but listen, ladies, I know that you guys are doing this. We're all doing it. I talk to hundreds of women every year. So I know that a large majority of women are doing this in one form or another in their relationships. I've talked to women who are dating. Y'all are doing it when you're dating. I've talked to women who are married, you're doing it when you're married. I've talked to women who are in the middle of a divorce and are still being over-responsible, overly conscientious, extending themselves for the spouse who is divorcing them for his girlfriend. And of course, we're doing it because we have been trained to do it. We have been conditioned to do it. We have automatic, almost compulsive triggers. We do it compulsively because we've been trained to do it. And not just that. When we don't do it, if a woman says, you know what, I'm not doing this, guess what happens? The whole world turns around and is like, wait, what? You're so mean, you're so selfish, you're doing this, that, and the other. I'll give you another example, again, from my life. During the divorce, so if you guys have been following the podcast for any length of time, you have the background of the divorce. I was blindsided by the divorce. I was busy trying to hold the marriage together, even though he was the one who had been behaving badly in that moment. I was trying to get therapy, trying to patch everything together. I was out of the house with the kids and working on the marriage, and he was alone in the house by himself doing nothing, not even showing up for therapy at this time. And I kid you not, during this period, so remember the background, I had to not move out. It was sort of like a temporary, listen, dude, you're acting really crazy and I'm just going to be over here with the kids at my friend's house until we can get some help. So I was doing that. I arranged the help, called the therapist, called the counselors, booked a counselor for him, counselor for me. The counselors were going to talk to each other and help put everything back together. I was taking care of the children outside of our normal space. So I was with the kids out of our normal space, doing all of that work. And then I was also emailing him all of the time during this period. So it was about a 6-week period. I was emailing him and saying, hey, you really need to show up for this therapy. You really need to do this. We need to work this out. We need to do this, that, and the other. And I was emailing him the kids' schedule. Now, mind you, I was also holding the kids' schedule together outside of our normal space, right? I was driving them to all of their normal activities. I was trying to keep a sense of normalcy for the kids. And while I was doing that, so I was doing the actual physical work in this situation, I would email him, hey, the kids are going to be at martial arts today at this time. You really need to come and watch them so that they can, know that you care about them. I was facilitating his relationship with the children while all of this was happening. And he was getting up in the morning, in the same bed, in the same house, doing, just generally taking care of only himself during this period. And then did he show up for any of the kids' activities during this time? No, he didn't. Until a couple of days before our first court date, where then he showed up and grabbed the kids and took them back to the house because I guess he learned that, well, the court is probably going to leave the kids with whoever has the kids or whatever the reason was. And that is the danger of over-responsibility, is that you would do all of that stuff and still lose out in the end. And then I've talked to women who are doing this, who in the middle of their divorce are doing the same things, being over-responsible, trying to facilitate the man's relationship with the children. Again, a man who generally doesn't care too much about his relationship with the kids, only for these women to find themselves on the other side of it with a poor, disconnected relationship with the kids. Because what they didn't realize was while you were busy trying to facilitate the man's relationship with the kids, you were neglecting your relationship with the kids, which is something that I realized that I did throughout that marriage. Was I neglected my own relationship with the kids because I was too busy trying to make him happy, trying to facilitate their relationship with him. Well, the kids need their dad and blah, blah, yada, yada, yada. So being over responsible out of obligation, out of guilt, out of being overly invested in your partner's life will cause you to be under-invested in your own life and will cause you to not see the areas of your own life that you are not working on, the areas of your own development that you are not working on, your own financial growth, career growth, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your friends, your health. It's inevitable that when you are overly responsible for someone else, you are automatically neglectful of yourself. And it may not be apparent on the surface. And this is because women have been conditioned to believe that our well-being, our future, our financial future, our relational future, our prestigious future, that's our status in society, our position in society, everything we want, everything we are desiring is wrapped up in this relationship with the man. And so we're taught that from a very young age with all the fairy tales, with all the rom-coms, our parents, our aunties, our mothers telling us and implying to us that this is the case. And so, of course, we believe that everything is wrapped up subconsciously. This is no longer conscious. We subconsciously believe that everything we want is wrapped up in this man. And so we do all the work to make sure the relationship with the man works. We're doing all of the work. We're putting in everything. Because we have been programmed, this is not a conscious thing. If you had asked me, 15 years ago, hey, is your entire life wrapped up in this man? I'd be like, no, my life is wrapped up in God. Right? Of course it's not conscious. So this is something to really sit with slowly in a very thoughtful, self-reflective way. Are there areas of your life where you are being overly responsible because of your conditioning, overly responsible to your partner? This does not apply to children. Now, I'm sure at a certain point when my children are young adults, so I am still working with them on a lot of their adulting, and that's totally okay. When it comes to children, the relationship is different. When you have a newborn, a toddler, a young child, a teenager, there is some level of over-responsibility that a parent has towards their children because they cannot care for themselves. They cannot take care of themselves in the world. They cannot protect themselves in the world. So yes, it is our responsibility to quote unquote be what might be considered over-responsible for our children because they cannot take care of themselves. And, as they move into being teenagers, as they move into young adulthood, then the transition begins where you start becoming less and less responsible and you hand the reins over to them in their lives. I think that's normal and healthy. I'm talking specifically today about romantic relationships, about your spouse. It does happen in other relationships too, but I think the biggest loss for women is when we are over responsible in our romantic relationships. Now, like I said earlier, when a woman then says, you know what? I'm letting go. I'm going to let falling things fall. There are knives falling all over the place. I'm going to stop catching these knives. I'm just going to let the man do his thing and I'm going to take care of myself and take care of my kids. Then the world shows up and is like, wait, what? You can't just let him be. You can't just let him fail. You can't just leave things alone. You can't just leave him alone, right? And here's another example from my life. I want to use examples from my life because those are situations that I intimately know and intimately feel and understand that this was the case, right? This was also during I think at this point, the divorce hadn't been finalized. Our divorce took a couple of years to finalize, but the separation had happened. Like most things, I'd gotten my own place with the kids and things like that. And of course, the minute, all that settled out, he didn't really want to take care of, the older kids because they would be like, Dad, no, I'm not doing that. Like they would call him out on stuff. So he basically essentially didn't contact them, wouldn't take advantage of his visitation with them, things like that. I don't want to go. I don't want to go into a lot of details around what happened with the kids because those are their stories to tell. But a friend of mine, so I was a single mom essentially at that point, and I did need help from, friends and family to like get my life together. It was a lot. And so I had a friend who, once in a while if I had a conflict with work and getting my kids to their activities, I would call, and she was very kind to be willing to show up for that and was really supportive. And there was a particular day very early, maybe this was the first or second time that she was assisting with taking my daughter across town for an event. And I had to take my son to another event and I was working in a different place. So I just couldn't be in two places at one time. So I asked if she would help. And she was like, yes. And so she did, kindly took my daughter there, brought her home and everything. Then later on, my daughter was like, Miss This said to me, asked me if I was praying for my dad and was encouraging me to pray for him. And I was like, oh my God. Like literally, the world was observing the fact that I was worrying about myself and I was worrying about my kids. And we were like, okay, let's just get our own stuff together. And the world could not leave it alone. It was like, wait, what? You're not gonna be with and they were telling this young child, she was telling this young child to begin to take on responsibility for her father. Emotional responsibility, spiritual responsibility. The father is the one supposed to be praying for his kids, supposed to be making sure his kids have what they need, supposed to be making sure that they are getting to their activities, supposed to be making sure that they are on track for the future, a successful future. And he wasn't. And we were like, fine. But then the world won't leave you alone either. They'll be like, wait, well, you can't just go and succeed on your own. You have to help him. You have to help him. How many, and I know some of you listening, especially some of you who come from like conservative cultures like mine, you have to help him. You've heard that so much. I heard that so much in my marriage. Oh, this was another one that really struck me. Do you know that the word secretary, which when you think of the word secretary, you're basically thinking of a woman, came from a piece of furniture. So when men went into the workplace, they had sort of like what would be sort of like a filing cabinet where they would organize like the Rolodex and, index cards. And that was where you did your administrative work. Your secretary was this piece of furniture where you did your administrative work. And then when women were hired, they were basically essentially like a piece of furniture. They were just resources. But again, so many rabbit trails that we could go into when it comes to this over responsibility and this function of a woman as a resource to support a man. If you also look into ADHD, people used to believe that ADHD got resolved in adulthood because one, only boys got diagnosed with ADHD. And when they got in their 20s and got girlfriends and got married, magically the ADHD disappeared. Why? Because women stepped in and took over the executive functioning. So these are like situations that, one, we've been conditioned to do it. Two, when you finally see it and you try to step back from it, people won't support you in stepping back from being over responsible. You're going to take a hit to your reputation as a good woman when you try to step back from being over responsible. You're either going to be overly responsible for the rest of your life, or you have to be willing for some people to disapprove of you taking a step back, right? And so by stepping in and being overly responsible for my ex-husband, I interrupted what would have been his normal path to maturity, success/failure, and learning. Now, ideally, he should not have been learning at that age. But when you think about the men who tend to have these tendencies, who have this sense of entitlement, they were given that sense of entitlement from their families of origin. Right? And so their families of origin probably had the women do all the work, or the mother did all the work. So the men felt entitled to not learning how to do things for themselves. So then they step into marriage and they're not entitled to not do things for themselves or not figure things out. And then if, as a wife, like I was, you step in and don't let the man figure things out for himself, we're perpetuating the problem because the man never learns. And I stayed with this person for 17 years. And it was only towards the end, like the last 3 years, that I really started to pull back, started to set some boundaries, and all of the poop hit the fan when I did. And I'll never know if I had been smart enough, wise enough to not be overly responsible at the beginning of the marriage. It is entirely possible. Maybe he would have learned. Maybe he would have changed. Maybe he would have figured it out. Maybe reality would have smacked him in the face and he would have been like, oh, I better grow up. But we'll never know. Because I enabled it for so long. So I want you to start thinking about yourself. Like, where are you in this pattern? Being overly responsible for the man or the men that are in your life, or even for other adults in your life. Again, let's leave children out of it. That requires a lot more nuance in this situation. But where are you being too responsible for other adults? And then start to think, when I'm putting in all of this mental energy, thinking and ruminating and scheming and planning and plotting and fixing, when I'm putting in my strategic brain to use for other people's executive functioning, when I'm putting in my emotional energy, when I'm putting in my physical energy, where am I not being responsible enough in my own life? When I'm working on someone else's career for them, where am I not working on my own career? Where am I not working on my own growth, on my own potential? I have so many stories about ways that I literally took on. I remember having a conversation with a lady about a month ago, and I said, oh yeah, like when my ex-husband wanted to go to graduate school, I did all of his applications for him. I wrote all of the essays and got him into a math program. I'm not even good at that stuff. Not even good at that. And he got accepted, and then he didn't go. Well, of course, why didn't he go? Because he didn't work for it. He didn't work for that admission. And so he was like, never mind, change my mind. Don't want to go to grad school after all. So I was giving this an example. And the woman I was talking to was like, oh, that's nothing. I completed my ex's graduate degree. Like, I did all of his homework. I was like, dang, girl. Wow. Yes, you win. Like, women, we are doing this all over the place. This is insane. We have to stop. We have to stop. We have so much potential. The women I work with are so gifted, high achieving, brilliant, hardworking. And we are taking all of that potential and we are dumping that energy and that brilliance into these black holes of men who are never going to produce an ROI on our efforts. We need to stop it. We need to absolutely stop it. Okay, so start to think about some of these terms that might come up if you are overfunctioning, if you are overly responsible, if you're carrying what isn't yours, if you're managing other people's feelings, managing their choices, managing their growth, trying to prevent negative consequences in their lives, trying to prevent them from having negative feelings or negative experiences where we want to support them so that things are good for them, right? At the expense of ourselves. It can sound like, oh, he just needs support. I want to be supportive. I don't need to pressure him. I'm just better at this, so I should do it. Oh, it's so easy for me. Like I can just get it done for him and he can move on. And we do it over and we think that, okay, now I'll just do this one time. It'll only take me a couple of hours to create this brilliant thing that will take him 6 months to do. And I'll just do it for him. And then that way, he can be happy. We want them to be happy and all that. If you're having any of those kinds of thoughts, you are being over responsible. And also, if you feel anxiety or tension or guilt when someone else is in distress, right? Like, I'm not talking about if someone is in a life or death situation and they need someone to call an ambulance or whatever, like you're witnessing something I'm not talking about that. Again, I'm putting a wrapper around what we're talking about today is in these intimate relationships. If you feel a lot of guilt or discomfort and you just cannot stand that feeling of guilt and discomfort at this person's distress because of their own adulting, not because they're in danger, not because they are drowning in a pool and they need a lifeguard, because they're just failing to adult. They're failing to launch and you cannot stand the feelings you have in your body. You compulsively have to help them in order to resolve those feelings. You're probably overly responsible. Right. And then think about whether or not you are under responsible. Are you neglecting your own needs, your own boundaries, your own decisions, your own finances? Are you failing to follow through on things in your own life? Because sometimes we decide subconsciously to be over responsible because we are afraid of failure in our own lives. We're afraid to go and tackle the things that we need to tackle in our own lives because we're afraid we'll fail or we're afraid we're not capable. And so we're like, well, I can do this with him and then that'll sort of move me along without me having to actually face the things I need to face on my own, right? So if you're telling yourself, if you're procrastinating your own needs, your own growth, you're procrastinating your own career, I'll do it later. Once he's okay, I'll focus on me. If you feel like you're just overwhelmed and like, okay, his thing is the thing that's like the fastest thing to take care of, you're delaying what your own life requires, you're not looking at your own future, or you are tying your own outcomes to his outcomes. Like you tell yourself that when he has a good outcome, that means you have a good outcome. You are taking under responsibility for your own life, right? So over responsibility is when you are carrying what belongs to someone else, right? And then you're being under responsible by postponing what you should be carrying for yourself as an adult, as an equal adult. And this shows up in so many situations. Women searching, trying to schedule therapy for their husbands. Like, let him schedule his own therapy. And then if he doesn't go to therapy, it's better for you to face what that really means. Because when you do his scheduling for him, you are simply postponing the outcome of the fact that he doesn't want to go to therapy. Because this man is scheduling his golf sessions. This man is scheduling his gym sessions. This man is scheduling bowling with the boys or whatever it is your guy does. He's scheduling those things, okay. If he's not scheduling his therapist the same way the same way he schedules all those things, he doesn't want to go to therapy. He doesn't think it's important. And it's more important for you to face that truth than to paper over it by being overly responsible. Right? Like don't manage those things for the man. In dating, women will, with dating, it's so much more subtle. But I'll give you a recent example. A client and I spent really talking about this because what would happen was she would be having these conversations with men on the apps and they wouldn't be asking her out, right? But they would tell her things like, yeah, I have custody of my kids, or I have this, that, and the other. And subconsciously, she would give them grace for the fact that, they were not spending time with her in person because they were taking care of her kids. or, they were traveling for work. And she would give them grace because they were traveling for work, so they couldn't spend time with her. Now, on the surface, that all looks really good. But as we would talk in our sessions, I'm like, girl, you are telling me so much about this man's schedule. Like, it's like you are calculating in for him his schedule and then deciding whether or not he's right for you or not. Instead of, it's a very subtle way, part of being overly responsible. I was like, instead of asking yourself, well, he's unavailable because he's traveling for work. What does that mean for me? He's unavailable to hang out with me because he's taking care of his kids and he has the kids. This is his 50-50 time. What does that mean for me? In a dating relationship, right? Like, she owes these people nothing. If a man does not have time to take women out on dates, my philosophy is he shouldn't be on the apps. If his kids need him that much, he needs to get off the apps and go and take care of his children. Like, literally. Because what will happen is, if she does get with this person, if they do become partners, it means that this man does not have enough capacity to handle his adult responsibilities and take care of his kids. Which means that when she comes into his life, she's going to be catching those balls. In the same way that she's catching them by being available to him, even though he's not taking her out, in a situation where there should be lots of attention, she's going to be catching those balls. Like, if this man cannot handle his life and his kids and date, he's not good with time management, and he needs to go fix what he needs to fix. He might have circumstances in his life that means that he's not available, but he does not have the self-awareness to say, oh, I don't have the capacity for this. And so I need to step away from something so that I can manage my time effectively. And for a woman to be giving grace for things like that means that she's getting ready to jump into that situation and become overly responsible for him and his children, for the fact that he's not going to have time for her, or he's not going to have time for work, or he's not going to have time for the vision that she's building with him, because there's just so much going on. This is a man who just does not have the capacity. And it's so hard to explain that to women, because it's like, oh my God, Shade, you're so hard. You're so cynical. I'm like, but it's just numbers. The man does not have enough hours in the day to spend with you. And that's not going to get better when you move in with him. He's not good with his time management. Or the man who travels for work. That's great. This is a man who travels for work. And when he's traveling for work, he does not have the capacity to be attentive to a partner while traveling for work. Is that what you want? Because even if you get married, he's going to be the guy who does not have the capacity to be attentive to you while traveling for work. None of this stuff is going to change down the line. And so it was a lot of conversations to really get her to see it. And what really clicked in for her was like, but there are other men who have children, who have young children and have custody of their kids, who are paying attention to you. And that's when it dawned on her. She was like, oh yeah, I really do have other people who are messaging me and we're going out. Sometimes we have to put it at odd hours because of the kids' schedule, but they make those hours available. I'm like, yes. The man who has the capacity and the ability to adult properly while being a parent and having a job and dating, it will be evident in the fact that you will see that they are making that time available, they're able to do. You won't have to, quote unquote, give them grace. You won't have to spend so much time giving the man grace. If you're having to give men grace while you're dating, you're in over responsibility, and that's not going to, don't do it. Don't do it. Right? Anyway, again, there's a lot of nuance to that. I'm giving this example because I'm working specifically with this client, so I know the circumstances around it. Like I always tell everyone, there are no formulas. It's always on a case-by-case basis, because you see a lot of things on the internet giving you 10 signs for this and 10. It really depends on the situation. You can't take anybody else's 10 signs and apply it to your dating life. But again, that's a whole nother conversation. So that's one of the ways that being overly responsible can show up when you're dating. It's very subtle, and it doesn't show up in the way the other person is behaving, because these men were not doing anything wrong. The man who wasn't asking her out, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just living his best life. I wouldn't even say he was a narcissist or he was a red flag. None of that. The problem was with my client and her thinking. She had that over-responsible thinking going on. And that is what was causing her issues. It wasn't the guy. There was nothing wrong with the guy. The guy needed to find a woman who would fit into his time management or situation or whatever, for whom that was okay. But it wasn't okay with this particular client. So overfunctioning, creates underfunctioning in your partner, and it creates underfunctioning in you in your own life. And the results are chaos. Over responsibility is one of the things that I will always work with my clients on if they tell me that their relationships are chaotic. If your relationships are chaotic, there's a whole lot of drama going on. Generally, over responsibility is happening somewhere. And so I want to pause the conversation here for today. I will definitely pick it up in the next episode. But I want to invite you to have this conversation with yourself about over-responsibility. And if this is something you want to do, I have a worksheet. It's got questions in it that help you examine if you are being over-responsible. And go ahead and send me an email or book a consultation call, and we can work through the worksheet together. But if you just want the worksheet, you can send an email to me, team, TEAM, @shadicurry.com, SADECURRY.com. And I will send you the worksheet, and you can ask yourself this series of questions that help you know if you are being over-responsible in your life, and you can start to tackle this pattern. This is one of the biggest patterns that harms women. When people say, well, you should take accountability for what happened in your marriage, this is one of the things that we need to take accountability for, because it's mostly women that are doing this. It's mostly us that are doing this, and it's harming us. We don't see the consequences immediately, but we are talking 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. The consequences of being overly responsible in your relationships are devastating. Okay, I want to pause here for today. Send me an email if you're interested in the worksheet. And it might take a couple of days to I might also put a link up where you can download it in the show notes. If that's something you're interested in, wait a couple of days. This is March. I'm recording this March 17th. So maybe by the end of the week, I could have a page up where you can download the over-responsibility worksheet. But if not, if you want it right away, just send me an email, team@shadicurry.com. I will get that to you immediately. Okay. Thank you for your time and attention today. It's been my pleasure, and I will talk to you on the next episode.